Mr. Rohit Vyas, welcome to ITV Gold. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to be with you again.
Yes, of course. We have you here, and it's so important to discuss everything that's happening in the nation and get some perspective in for the community. So let's dig right into it. What are some of the closely followed stories by you for this week? What is something that's getting nation's attention according to you?
Well, I think what's coming up big now is the fact that AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical company that's working with Oxford over in England, and actually with an Indian pharmaceutical company as well to produce a vaccine as quickly as possible, has held up its vaccine production because of an illness among one of its volunteers,
Right.
who are volunteering themselves to get this experimental shot in the quest for a new vaccine. I think that's the biggest news right now hitting the airwaves this week, because everybody's been thinking a vaccine as something that will happen overnight and will happen miraculously no matter what. If you recall, in our last interview, I said to you, no one can be sure that there will even be a vaccine at all. It takes a long time for a vaccine to be developed. It needs a lot of experimentation, a lot of safety regulations, guidelines, all the rest of it before an effective one can even be marketed. Usually it takes 5 to 10 years for a really good vaccine to be out. And governments everywhere, not just here in the United States, are trying to fast track this one. Ours is called Operation Warp Speed, to try and get one out here in the United States as quickly as possible. That's the big news, I think, happening this week. I think also the big news is the economy.
Yeah.
The August jobs report came out showing a better than expected number of jobs of people who were employed rather than unemployed. And so that was some unexpectedly good news. The stock market is always in the news, but it really has no bearing on the reality of Main Street. That's all Wall Street. The stock market's going up and down. A lot of people forget it's because of a lot of cash infusion from the federal government and the Federal Reserve itself. And that's why the stock markets are doing well. The Federal Reserve made sure that the stock markets would do well, the markets would be stable, so that we don't have a huger problem than we already have with the pandemic upon us. And of course, the political race is the other big issue. We are now post-Labor Day, which means it's the final stretch before the presidential election in November. And that means now we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of what's happening. As I've also said to you previously, I don't believe in polls as much as they've been quoting them on both sides. Polls are never, in my mind, 100% accurate. That was proven in 2016, when all the polls were showing Hillary Clinton ahead of then candidate Donald Trump. A similar situation is going on right now, where some polls are showing Joe Biden ahead by 12 points.
Right.
Some are showing him ahead by about 10, 8. Some are showing them in a dead heat. I don't believe any of the polls. We'll know only during the elections. But I think what we should all be focusing is on what the candidates are going to be saying about the issues, the pandemic, the quest for a vaccine, the economy, whether we're going to ever get back to pre-pandemic normalcy, and then of course the situation of race, what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with Jacob Blake, and the ramifications of that. So lots of news going on around the world.
Looking at the vaccine, what is your comment on it becoming a political issue in the country right now? We have President Trump claiming that the vaccine would be ready before the election day, giving many people a hope that we're not sure if it's going to be met. We have, health experts saying that they aren't sure if it'll be ready even by 2021. Right now, you just gave us that news about, this development in another vaccine. So what do you have to say about this becoming such a political mess almost?
It is a political mess, and it's a political issue naturally, because it can determine the fate of the election, actually. I'm not so sure President Trump is trying to use it too much as a political bait, as it were. I think what's happening is he is basically someone who likes to show a rosy picture about things. He doesn't want people to panic and the rest of it. Maybe it's going to help him politically, and I guess that's probably part of the way he speaks and stuff about a vaccine. But I think more than that, the overriding factor is, in his mind, I believe, he's optimistic. He's hopeful that there will be a vaccine. He wants to be the president who did fast track trials, who did fast track the quest for a vaccine. After all, he named it Operation Warp Speed to get to a vaccine in a historic period of time, which has never happened before ever in the history of medicine. He wants to be the man that leads it. So yes, it has become political. On the other hand, the Democrats are playing it down, saying that he's pushing something before the elections because he wants to get elected. They have a legitimate argument in that particular piece of quote from all of them over there, when they say that it's impossible, you can't get one, and it shouldn't be pushed just to get him elected. They're right about that. I think everybody knows that eventually all this is going to be determined by the science behind it. And that's why a day before this interview that's taking place right now, 9 CEOs or heads of pharma companies signed a document together saying that they would not compromise safety.
Yeah.
And whatever they do, they're going to make sure this vaccine that comes up, if it does come into being, will be safe and effective for the population at large. And then right after that news broke, we had AstraZeneca halting its test on its vaccine because of one of its candidates getting seriously ill, and they're trying to figure out now whether it's because of the vaccine or if it's another cause. It's also an automatic brake system within the vaccine, scientific community. Something like this that happens when they hold up a test, it's because they want to make sure that the test is safe going forward.
Yes, for sure. Just discussing a little bit more on COVID-19 and President Trump here. Earlier today, we heard this claim where it was said that President Trump has downplayed the pandemic from the beginning, and he was really worried about the pandemic in the month of March, and we're still trying to figure out what was exactly said. Could you give us some insight into it?
Yeah, I think actually that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I had a couple of the news conferences that were going on with the COVID task force at the White House, where President Trump was taking questions himself and answering questions himself. He was asked that. Way back in March, he was asked in April again, I recall. He was asked pointedly by reporters, why are you downplaying the seriousness of this illness, of this virus? And he kept saying, I'm not downplaying it. And in the end, he kept saying, reminding reporters, look, I'm an optimist. I don't want people to think that things are going to be terrible, things are going to be bad. Now, I'm not defending President Trump. I'm just saying it shouldn't come as a surprise that he downplayed it. He did downplay it even at the news conferences. It was nothing secret. He did downplay it, and he didn't admit that he was dismissing the seriousness of the virus, but he was trying to say people shouldn't panic as he thought media were trying to project it, or others were trying to project it. And he wanted to be the optimist. So I think that's in his nature. He does not want to, I don't think he lied, as there are assertions coming out that he lied. I think he simply was being, giving it a rosier picture. Maybe that was not the right thing to do. But at the same time, if you're the president of the United States, do you want to go out there and panic the entire 350 million American population by saying something scary? If you think about it, when you're a president, when you're in a responsible position like that, do you want to go out there and tell people, look, you're going to die? Can you imagine what would that do to all the millions of people? What's going to happen? The run on stores, the run on things, the people crying. It's huge. When you're a president, you don't want to scare an entire population. So I think that's the way he was thinking. Now, whether he should have gone along seriously with medical advice and maybe taken a slightly different approach, perhaps said, it's serious, but we're going to handle it. We're going to be on top of it. We need you to cooperate with us. We need to have a cohesive national plan. Maybe that's the route he should have taken. But I can't outguess the president. Like I said, he seems to be an optimist for most of the time, even when it comes to his own election. He's an optimist. When he sees poll numbers that are against him, he's still an optimist. So that's, I think, more to do with his nature, rather than him being a liar, or rather than him trying to downplay things deliberately, just to downplay them. I don't think that's true.
What kind of role does this, or COVID-19 in general, then play in the process of elections? Again, we're only about 2 months away from these elections, and a lot is at stake. What is your comment on that?
I don't think COVID-19 itself will play much of a stake in the election at all.
Okay.
I think what's going to play a stake And a big role is the economy, the state of the economy. People were used to working before the pandemic hit. And I don't think most of the population are blaming any government, much less blaming President Trump here in the United States. I don't think anywhere in the world any population at all is blaming any government leader. They just want to know if this is going to be over. But here in the United States, the elections, in my opinion, and as I've seen them over the decades, has always been ultimately dependent upon the bottom line, money, what's in the average American's pocket, whether they're making a decent living, putting food on the table, buying their house, able to pay their landlords if they're renting, etc. That's what's going to affect the course of this election. I don't think it's going to be anything else, as always is the case. And so if the economy improves again, if we get good September numbers, for instance, that come out in October, I think at that point, Trump is going to be ahead of the game. Now, don't forget there are eight swing states or critical battleground states, of which there are three others: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I just made some notes for myself here. I've been studying some of this, and so we'll see how these states begin to think their populations, because they're the ones who could swing this election one way or the other, as they did in 2016. So people in different states are going to think differently about this virus. Right. And it's kind of difficult right now to predict, but bottom line, the economy and the economic well-being of Americans.
What information could you then give us about this stimulus package that the Democrats and Republicans keep on fighting on? We've heard it in the news. President Trump had to go ahead and pass executive orders so that people unemployed could still get some access and resources. What is your take on this, the stimulus package?
This is getting more political now as we get closer to the election. So people will be watching. By the way, it's a good question, because a lot of people will be watching this as well. But I still don't think it'll have that big an impact if numbers of employment improve within the month of September. If they do, I think this won't have much of an impact. But the fact about the impetus and the giving people relief and stimulus money and all the rest of it, right. I think it's going to be pared down. Eventually, I think both parties will come to an agreement. It's not going to be what the Democrats passed a couple of months ago already, the $3 trillion package. It may not be the less than $1 trillion, which I think was about $800 billion that the Republicans wanted. I think it's going to be somewhere in the region of $1.5 trillion, maybe. Getting to 2 would be difficult. I think there will be very limited stimulus checks, if there are. Right now, they're saying there isn't any. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, has not proposed one in the very latest proposal from the Republicans. But if they do finally agree and talk, there might be limited stimulus, not the $1,200 per person previously, maybe about $800. That's my guess. As to the unemployment, federal unemployment, relief, the extra $600 that was there, that will not be $600 anymore. It could be closer to $400. The Republicans are talking about $300. Democrats want the full $600 through the end of the year or through January. Right. The Republicans will probably agree to about $400, is my guess, and leave it at that to the end of December. And that'll be about it. The other thing is the payroll protection plan. They need to extend that, because otherwise we're going to see a lot of small businesses go under. New York City just came out to, not New York City, but the Restaurant Association in New York came up with the figures just this week that stated 2/3 of New York restaurants are expected to close by January 31st. That is a frightening proposition, absolutely frightening proposition. If that happens, can you imagine what will happen in New York City? Can you imagine what will happen to thousands and thousands of jobs? Can you imagine what's just going to happen to the whole city itself, where nothing happens? And can you imagine how that'll in turn affect the entire nation? It's pretty serious. So, yeah.
I have to ask you, when we're discussing a lot of this, do you believe or do you think that we are going to see this political struggle between House or Senate Democrats and Republicans till November 3rd? Is this happening a lot because we do have these elections coming?
Sure, always. It's always the case. During the elections, when there are seats up for grabs, Senate seats and House seats and a presidential race, all that, sure, it gets very contentious. This is nothing new. and it will get contentious. Now the thing is, how many Republicans are going to be complete Trumpers, Trump supporters, or rather be conservatives and aloof from Trump? That's what this election is showing us right now. How many of them want to be distant from him? How many want to be close to him? And that depends on their districts, of what their constituents are saying to them, whether they like Trump or not. So you'll notice some of these Republicans, for instance, either getting closer to President Trump, thinking they'll ride on his coattails to a victory, or being too close to him means they're going to be ousted. Democrats are looking at that same picture, and they're looking at the vulnerable Republicans who will be in areas where their constituents want them out, and so that's where the Democrats want to flip those seats and make them Democratic. Vice versa is true. For the Republicans, many Republicans see Joe Biden as the wrong candidate for Democrats, as many Democrats do. They think he represents the establishment. Many are talking about whether he can carry on a conversation in a debate, for instance, an extemporary debate, not scripted. He has had some issues. It looks on television like he's forgetting what he's saying, and they're going to play into that. As far as Trump goes, the Democrats are going to play into what they see as his limited vocabulary. So you're going to see a lot of contentious back and forth between the two. But then the local races, the congressional races, the Senate races, those are going to be more about constituent issues. So if constituents don't have enough jobs, say in Mitch McConnell's constituency in Kentucky, you're going to see big changes over there, because they're going to blame it on him. They don't care about the president. They don't care about anybody else. He's their leader over there, and they've sent him to Capitol Hill from there. So it's going to be very interesting. The smaller races are going to be probably as contentious and important as the big one.
Oh, wow. I feel like we're just preparing for something really big and just preparing our hearts for some ugly conversations or debates.
Yeah.
Let's hope it doesn't happen like we saw in 2016. While we have the elections going on and we have the pandemic going on, we cannot deny the fact that there is a race war that's happening in the middle of it. And just to understand it is getting very, very complicated. So let's break it down a little bit for our audience that's watching it today. What are your comments on the case of Jacob Blake? And, while you're answering that, how do we now look at systemic racism in this country? And we continuously are having this dialogue on it, but it seems like nothing is being done. What needs to be done?
Okay, you used the word systemic racism. A lot of people don't see it that way. They don't see it as systemic racism. They just see it as a divide. Certain people are seen as being racist. For instance, the whites are seen as being largely racist by many minorities, and the others will see it. Will see it the other way. That no, it's a matter of these guys screaming and shouting all the time. So you have to look at two sides of the coin. Yes, you mentioned Jacob Blake. Once again, the wonders of modern technology, the phone that you have in your hand, you can stand and record stuff. So you see a lot of things. But remember, it's law enforcement in action. And it happened to be, again, a minority person, a black person. And from the video, it appeared he was shot in the back. 7 times was that shot. It was actually disturbing video. I couldn't watch it. I saw it once and I was terribly disturbed myself. But if you have to look at it objectively, you got to think about what was the police officer seeing from inside? What was he seeing? Was he seeing something completely different that we're seeing from this video shot being taken by a mobile camera? If you start thinking about that, it'd be that way. You then realize you got to wait till there is a thorough investigation. What you have to make sure is that investigation is absolutely credible, and somebody is really from all communities are there to listen to the testimony to make sure, and to the accounts, to figure out whether this actually happened the way it looked. It looks exactly the way it is, which is this man was shot in the back. And for no reason whatsoever. He wasn't doing anything, wasn't resisting. But on the other hand, you have to realize there is another side to this too, even though it looks as horrible as it does. I'm trying to be as objective and explain this as clearly as possible, because I've covered law enforcement myself for years. I've covered racist situations for years and years in our own community, and have seen both sides of it. And it's very difficult. And this whole thing has led to talk about defunding the police,
Right.
led to talk about abolishing police departments, etc. That's not the solution. What I think is extremely important here, we see a major breakdown in police work and community liaison. These two need to be allies in the fight to protect communities at large. So in other words, I mentioned to you actually a couple of interviews ago about how I think there should be the patrol on the beat. The police officer who's out there in the neighborhood. They've got to be back out there. They've got to know the neighborhood. They've got to be able to recognize people, recognize those who might be dangerous to the community and to themselves. And then you can start to figure out law enforcement in a proper perspective. I think this whole thing is a much bigger issue than it looks like. It's not just racial, because then you see these riots where there's violence. Who's perpetrating the violence?
Right.
The demonstrators are not. They are legitimately protesting. Now you've got infiltrators coming in and making the demonstrators look bad. So there's a bigger picture in all of this, and we do have to look at all sides, which gives me the reinforced argument, which I'm giving to you and your viewers, that law enforcement, community leaders need to work together to solve this problem. Otherwise, it's never going to go away.
So this debate of a national defunding of police, do you think it's unnecessary?
Yes, completely unnecessary. You cannot defund police anywhere in the world. I gave you the example of British police who are more community servers.
Right.
They serve the community. Therefore, for the longest time, the Bobby, the British police, the London police officer, was never armed. Now you have some of them armed because of the more terroristic attacks that have taken place, unfortunately. But that was a good example of how you don't need a police force. But in America, you obviously can't do without a police force. Everyone has the right to arms. I mean, everyone who's in a perfectly stable mental state of mind has the right to own arms. Every American citizen can own arms. The Second Amendment is there. And of course, there are other consequences to that. So you can't defund police. You cannot demoralize the police force either. You cannot demoralize communities. Therefore, there has to be dialogue. I mean, it's not that the Black community, the Latino community, the Asian community can be without police officers.
Yeah.
You can't. We cannot be without. They protect us all. They protect every one of us. They're sworn to protect us. That badge is there to swear us. If they betray that badge,
Yeah.
they should be out. But defunding them, not the solution at all. No.
You're essentially saying that the funding needs to be allocated in resources where they are aware of the communities around them, the people
Yes.
of color around them, the religions around them, not necessarily really taking the money away from the police department.
No. In fact, they can reroute those resources toward community policing, toward community meetings. Have a board of community members on the police department. We can do that with every police department. I mean, the larger ones, okay? Like the NYPD. You can have a committee, in my opinion, and I've worked with the NYPD for years as a crime reporter. You can have a committee of advisors on the NYPD, for instance, just as an example, Chicago police, okay? So this way you have blacks, whites, Asians, Latinos, everybody part of that committee, a 10-member committee, for instance. They will meet with the police department every month, maybe. All right, there will be exchanges of views. This is the kind of crime we had. These were the neighborhoods where it all happened. This was the violence. These are the statistics. These are the drug dealers we picked up. This is who we think is doing it, perpetuating the crime, etc., etc. The community in turn can tell the police, you guys have been shooting too much at our people. They can be a debate up at that level, and then the entire department can start to realize what they all need to do together collectively to make for better policing. That's what I would do. Honestly, that's what I would encourage. And there were committees like that in certain police jurisdictions over the years. They've quickly faded away. I was on one of them in New Jersey myself. I think during the Christie Whitman administration. I was on the Asian American Pacific Advisory Council for Governor Whitman. Wow. And I continued with the Jim McGreevey administration after that. And one of the things we all did on that committee, we weren't directly connected to police, but we talked about police work and how it affected minorities and communicated with police officials to make things better for all of us in the state of New Jersey.
Wow. Definitely a lot of work is needed here for sure. What is your comment and take on the Black Lives Matter movement? We are coming towards the close of this interview, but I really want you to get some word out for them. And how do you think we should all be supporting the cause or being a part of the cause, especially because we are a model minority?
Oh yeah, definitely. The Black Lives Matter movement was a long time coming, should have come a long time ago. They have faced enormous injustice, no question about it, in my mind, for what, couple of 100 years, 300 years, whatever. And I think enough is enough. Yeah, I mean, overwhelmingly, the Black community has been targeted in various acts of violence. I don't want to single out and say it's only police or anybody like that, but in various acts of violence, in various aspects of life, they have faced discrimination. They have faced being looked down upon. They have faced terrible slurs and all the rest of it. And so this movement was a long time coming. And yes, our communities, our Asian community, the Latino community, any minority, any immigrant community in the United States owes a lot of what it's achieved to the sacrifices of the Black community, the African American community. It is they who have brought attention to the role of minorities. I don't think any of us, including the Black community or Latino community or Asians, want to be called a minority. But we are, in terms of the larger demographic population in the US. We are a minority.
Right.
And you don't want to be looked down upon, et cetera, et cetera. You have a contribution to make to society. So and it was the Black community that led this and cleared the path for immigrants. If the Black community didn't fight the way they did, immigrants would not be permitted. People of different shades and different colors and different thinking and different customs and cultures would not be allowed into the United States. I think the openings for all of our communities were made and led by the Black community. And so we owe a debt to the Black community for our own successes. Indians make up the top income bracket now in the United States.
Right.
I say we owe it to the African American community. We all owe it to them to open up the pathways for all of us to be able to migrate here, show we're good, we can make it here, we have a chance. Because they suffered it all. They suffered it all, I say, on our behalf. And so it's very important that we support them when they have a legitimate case of what's happened to them and to their community. We have a responsibility to support them and make sure they rise with all of us.
And let's not forget, this is history and facts, real facts that have happened, real stories that have been told. We're not making this up. So this is something that I think the audience should consider. Thank you so much for being with us on ITV Gold yet again. It's always a pleasure to have you. I would love for you to give one last message out to our audience, but specifically to the youth of our community. Again, the next couple of months are going to be so essential in getting our voices out. What do you have to say to them?
I think our youth actually are ahead of the game. I think I've seen a lot of young people getting involved now. We had begun when I was the editor of India Abroad way back, in the 80s, in the 70s, late 70s and 80s. We had begun a movement to get students to enroll with us, and we put them into legislative programs back then. This is a long time ago. And the idea was to have future generations of Asian Americans, Indian Americans at the time, and now Asian Americans as a whole, to get involved in the political process, and it's happening. I'm not going to take credit for it, neither am I going to say that any of us, the founder of India Abroad at the time, Gopal Raju, was the man behind it all, who led the movement, and we all supported him in doing it. But that's just one instance where we were doing it. Your own founder, Dr. Vishwanath of ITV and Vision of Asia, also was part of that movement from the senior Indians to encourage young Asians, young Indians, young South Asians to get involved in the process. I think today's young people are very much involved in the process. There might be some who are not, and to them I'd say, guys, you have the vote. It's your future. You got to go ahead and take charge, because the older folks are going to wither away as time goes by. That's a fact of life. We all will face it. People will be gone, and you'll be the next generation. I think this is a very important election, as every single election is in the history of our great country, the United States. Every single presidential election, every election is very, very important. Be more and more involved. Be involved at the local level. Be involved at the legislative level. as you go hard, get even more involved, and that's all I can say. And vote, most important.
Yeah.
Go out there and vote in November.
Definitely. We want to advise and remind everyone to register to vote. It's extremely essential for us to get our voices out. Again, thank you so much for your time here on ITV Gold.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.